Good afternoon, everyone. It's so lovely to be here with you today in Melbourne, and a huge hello to all the people joining in from capital cities all around Australia. And a huge thanks to UN Women Australia for bringing us all together today to talk about climate change and to celebrate the achievements that women have made, particularly Jane. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I'm joining you from today, the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge any Indigenous and First Nations people who happen to be tuning in today, whether live in this room with me or virtually, or potentially from the comfort of your home. A couple of days ago, I was at a different event, and one of the speakers noted that Aboriginal people have been on this land for 40,000 plus years, and arguably we could consider them to be one of the most sustainable societies that we have ever seen in this story that we say is civilization. Only look at how far we've strayed in the last 250 years. As we celebrate International Women's Day today, yesterday, tomorrow, this upcoming week, it's sort of a bit of a month now, I think it's really important for us not to actually forget to look back and reflect and learn and listen from all of the things in the past as we think about what does changing climates look like in terms of achieving equality today for a sustainable future tomorrow. My name is Linh, and as just introduced, I have been telling people that I've been working on climate change for the last decade. But in the same way that, there are certain people when their birthday rolls around, they keep turning the same age. I think that's me when I talk about my work, because I think it's been a little bit over a decade now, but I still like to use the number 10. My journey in figuring out what it could possibly look like for me to do something to make a little bit of a difference on this planet, in this world, started when I was in high school. Unlike a lot of our amazing school strikers who've been organising their peers and parents to go out onto the streets and say that climate action is something important and something that we want to see real policy change on now, I was super focused in on energy efficiency and talking to people about light bulbs. Since then, though, in the last so-called decade, I've had the opportunity to work overseas with the UN, door knock within Australia, work within boardrooms across corporate Australia. And it's been a really amazing journey where every day I get the joy of waking up knowing that I'm contributing to something that is bigger than myself, something that is hopefully going to leave the world in a better place. It's a real privilege because I know not everyone has the opportunity to wake up every morning knowing that, in my case, they get to address and try to work on one of the greatest moral challenges of our time, the climate crisis. I know not everyone is able to know what their passion is, to be able to find something that gives them the opportunity to contribute to the world where potentially they have skills, but also in a way that also pays the bills. So most days I wake up feeling super fortunate and very happy to be me. Thank you. That's going to make the next sentence sound even worse now. Because that really hasn't been the case this week. I know sometimes when it gets to Friday, people are like, woo, Friday, weekend's coming. But for me, all I can do is go, whoa, what a big week that we have been through. It's been really hard for me to wake up in this past week feeling super fortunate and joyful and just ready to roll out of bed knowing that I do have that amazing opportunity to try to do something that helps make the world a little bit better. And it's been hard because the invasion of Ukraine really speaks to a lot of what is problematic in the world right now when it comes to an abuse of power. It's horrifying, it's terrifying. And even though it's half a way around the world, our lack of proximity doesn't mean that we can't feel empathy, or that we don't feel paralysed in fear, or that we can't put ourselves in the shoes of the people that have to flee their home countries. Then there's the reality of, when was the last time we were all in a room like this? For those of us in Melbourne in particular, we're still coming out of not just the shadow lockdown, but actually the world's longest lockdown as we try to shake what COVID-19 has meant for us over the last 2 years, and the reality of knowing that there's still a lot of uncertainty in the world. And that's before I even get to any of the things to do with the climate crisis. On Monday, I took a really difficult phone call because I learnt that my friend in Brisbane had lost their house due to the flooding. This was the same friend who, back in 2011, had lost their family home. On Tuesday, I stayed up, as we all do, to doom scroll through the IPCC report, which is essentially a report that the UN puts out about the latest in the climate science. And I use the word latest because technically that is true, but the report didn't necessarily tell us anything new, at least, and I caveat that with, in order to act with real conviction on the climate crisis. If anything, the report just highlighted the fact that since the last report that came out, we haven't done enough. We haven't dialed up our ambition in a way that means we're actually addressing these issues that are having consequences today. And that world, well, this report speaks quite a lot, not just about the projected likely impacts that are coming in the future in 2030, in 2050, these other years that I'm sure you've heard about. It talked about the impacts that we're having today. The climate crisis isn't something that we can deal with in the future. It's something that we have to deal with today and, ideally yesterday, because we're already suffering the consequences. At this moment in time in our shared human story, 50% of the world's people are on the front lines of climate change. Once upon a time, we thought that was something that was happening in a country far and distant away. But no, it's impacting half of the world's population right now. And we know that women and girls will be disproportionately impacted even within that figure. And to bring it a little bit closer to home, some of the people that will be impacted, it's our fellow citizens up in the Torres Strait who are at risk of losing not just their homes right now, but their cultural identities with rising sea levels. It's our friends, families, colleagues, and just fellow citizens in Queensland or New South Wales experiencing flooding due to La Nina years. It's the harsh reality of knowing that in the alternating, I know, El Nino years, I say that really terribly, it means that we'll be encountering drought and bushfires. For those of us in Victoria and for those of us who can cast our minds back to that time before COVID, we suffered a pretty horrific summer. The reality is that our current trajectory, alongside, for me, the realisation that because I can't count past 10, I've actually been spending half of my life working on the climate crisis, has made this a super hard week. And now, I've been told more than once that I'm a bit of a downer when people invite me to dinner parties. During COVID, I didn't get many Zoom invites to dinners, that was fine. Didn't take it too personally. And I get that, particularly in this week when I've been speaking to people, I've been particularly sombre. And that's why I'm here today, to bring down the mood just a little bit. But it's also why I'm really delighted to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, someone who, despite literally, well and truly over half of her lifetime, decades upon decades upon decades, still remains a beacon of hope. Dr. Jane Goodall, we know her as a primatologist, as I discovered, a beloved hero of many different people, and I'm sure many in this room or watching this event today. But she's someone that really embodies what it means to be hopeful. In the interview that you're about to watch, you'll hear her share around how hope isn't just this feeling, but actually hope is a series of actions that we can take in order to get by. And sometimes it's really hard and you have to be ready to run a marathon. But other times it'll be more easy because you're surrounded by other people that are just as passionate about you, just as ready to roll up their sleeves. Now, the climate, gender, and as I'm sure you've gotten a bit of a sense of me now, this list could be long, so I'll keep it short, and the geopolitical crises that we face today really will require all of us to work together, to cooperate, to be ready to collaborate, and whilst there's technical skills that we might need or content knowledge that we would like to be able to possess to do that, I think one of the most critical things that will actually help us address gender inequality, the climate crisis, and the various other issues is learning how to flex that muscle called hope. Learning how to build and hold on to the hope that we need to be able to retain internally and knowing how to use it. And it's important that we can cultivate it for ourselves because when you've got friends like me, you can also help them see the light at the end of the tunnel. So for anyone else in the audience today who, whether it's in this past week, as a result of these remarks I've given, in the past 2 years or at any other point in your life, just felt a little bit down about the state of the world, I know that this interview coming up with Dr. Jane Goodall is really going to remind you of why we have so much to be hopeful for. Thank you.
Hi Jane, my name's Lynn. Is it okay that I call you Jane? I feel like I should also say Dr. Jane or Dr. Goodall perhaps. Jane's fine.
Perfect. I feel like normally we thank people at the end of interviews or after we've spent some time with them, but I think the thousands of people that are going to be listening to this interview are so excited to be hearing from you because of the role you've played as a scientist, an environmentalist, a humanitarian, that lady with the chimpanzees, or as I recently discovered, at least as a personal hero to probably 60% of my friends. When I was telling them about the opportunity to talk with you today, people were beyond excited. But I guess I'd love to start our conversation today with a question that is either going to be the easiest or the hardest one, which is, how would you describe yourself? Because I think you're so many things to so many people, but I guess when you think about who is Jane Goodall, what do you think and what do you see?
Jane Goodall is the person that you're looking at over the miles on the screen in front of you. I'm just an ordinary person who's had extraordinary opportunities in her life and given gifts, and they were gifts. And one gift is that I've had a strong constitution, so I have been able to be out in the wild and not suffer too badly. And secondly, a gift of communication. Those were given to me at birth, and I've done my best to look after them. I've done my best to increase the way that I speak to people and the way that I write. And but I'm just an ordinary person with these gifts that I've worked to make better.
You're just a person in the way that we're all just people. And if we put in that time and that effort, who knows where things could go. And I think in the case of the career and the life that you've had, you've really seized so many of those opportunities. And it's so easy to get lost in your Wikipedia page of all your accomplishments and achievements and whatever else. But I guess, in Jane just being Jane, I'd love to hear from you around, I guess, what are some of the moments that you would describe as either your greatest or proudest achievements? Like, what are the things that just make you pause and make you really happy and smile that you've had the opportunity to either experience that or achieve that?
Well, you're asking a very difficult question because I'm just about 88 years old. And during those 88 years, there have been so many of these moments. Probably the first that I sort of remember and have been boosted by my amazing mother, who really I attribute the way she raised me, has done a great deal to create the Jane that's become an icon without her wishing to become an icon, um, was when I was 4.5 years old and given a job of collecting hens' eggs. We went to stay on a farm, very exciting as we lived in London at the time. And I kept asking, apparently, I don't remember, but I was asking everybody, where does the egg come out of the hen? Because I couldn't see the right size hole. So nobody told me. What I do remember is seeing this hen. She was brown and she was climbing into this hen house where they slept at night and thinking, I suppose, she's going to lay an egg, crawling after her. I still remember the squawks of fear and her wing hitting my face as she flew out. And again, I must, in that little 4.5-year-old mind, have thought, no hen will lay an egg in this hen house. It's a dangerous place. So I went into another empty one, and I was apparently gone waiting for over 4 hours, aged 4. And I distinctly remember seeing the hen come in. I saw the egg come out, and I rushed excitedly towards the house. They had to call the police. Nobody knew where I was. And so many mothers would have grabbed that child and said, how dare you go off without telling us? Where on earth have you been? Don't do that again, which would have killed the excitement. But my mother saw the shining eyes and she sat down to hear the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And I tell that story because if I'd had a different kind of mother, I might not have become the Jane that I am. Because in that story, you see the making of a little scientist, the curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there. Anyway, you asked for moments. Well, getting an invitation to go to Kenya, working to get the money at a hotel just around the corner here because I'm in the house where I grew up. And then meeting Dr. Lewis Leakey and his offering me after about, well, nearly a year, he offered me the opportunity to go and study chimps. The first day I arrived in Gombe and climbed up the hill by myself after the tent had been put up. And then David Greybeard, the first chimp to lose his fear of me, on that very special day, using grass stems to fish for termites. So he was using tools. And watching the development of a little infant, Flint, seeing how his mother treated him, learning lessons from it. All those are key moments, and there are many more.
That's a really hard question to reflect on almost 9 decades of your life. But I love that the very first story you shared was from when you were 4, and how really I can completely see and understand how you would be able to go to Kenya and observe chimps and spend days and days on end waiting for them to also come to trust you as well. I guess quite a lot of what I hear in some of those moments is that relentless persistence to pursue a dream and to pursue something that you're really passionate about. In doing some of my research for this interview, one of the articles that I read was something that you had written, I think, a few years back, where you had also talked about as a young girl, you sometimes dreamed, but as a man, because there weren't necessarily female scientists or explorers that you could necessarily look up to. And I guess I'd be really curious to hear what you think around what's the importance, even in today's day and age, around having really strong female role models for both boys and girls to be looking up to.
Yes, I think, we need role models that are male and role models that are female. And I think they are very important. But it doesn't really matter which sex. It's what the person does. I mean, there weren't female role models doing what I wanted to do. In fact, there were only 3 men who'd been out in the field studying animals, and I didn't know about them, but they had been there. The important thing is getting a role model and realizing if he or she can do it, I can do it too. I think that's the key thing. And there's something I always love. It's one of the indigenous tribes in, I think it's Colombia, I'm not sure, one of the Latin American countries. And I met one of the chiefs of this tribe, or the chief of that tribe. And what he said to me, I've never forgotten. He said, "Jane, we see our tribe as like an eagle, and one wing is male and the other wing is female. And only when the wings are equal will our tribe fly high." To me, that is something that's really wonderful. We all have male and female within us, and we need male and female role models. But the main thing is to find a role model that helps you realize he, she does it. I can do it too.
Sometimes, even if the role model isn't there or you don't necessarily see someone doing what you would love to do, it doesn't mean that you can't pave that way forward for yourself, which is definitely something you've done. And for me, what I guess was really strong in that was the role that your mum played in supporting you to pave a pathway into the unknown. Can you speak a little bit more or share with us just like the importance of that support that you've had from her?
Well, as I was growing up, it was very obvious. Even at 1 year old, 1.5 years old, she found I'd taken earthworms to bed with me. And she said, "Jane, you were watching them so intently. I think you were wondering how they moved without legs." And she didn't get mad at me, although my bed was full of earth. She just said, "We'd better take them back into the garden because they might die here." And she found books for me about animals, thinking, well, if there's books about animals, Jane will be learning to read more quickly, which was true. And she supported this dream when I was 10 and dreamed of Africa. I wanted to live with wild animals and write books about them. I've always loved writing. Even as a tiny little girl, Mum used to transcribe my stories. And so I was telling everybody I'm going to grow up and go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them. And they all laughed at me. "How will you do that? There's a war going on." It was World War II. you don't have money. Africa's far away. We don't know much about it. It's a dangerous place. And anyway, you're just a girl. Girls don't do that sort of thing. But not my mother. She said, if this is something you really want to do, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. And then if you don't give up, maybe you'll find a way. And that's a message I take around the world to young people, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And I wish Mum was around to know how many people have said, Jane, thank you, because you taught me, because you did it, I can do it too.
I think so often we can be really dismissive of young people in particular, whether that's, when they're 2 or when they're teenagers leading the sort of climate strike movement that we're seeing at the moment. But the difference that it can make when there's someone that, is a parent, whether it's your mum, your dad, maybe even an older sibling, who is both in your corner and one of the giants that you can sort of stand on the shoulders of. It's pretty phenomenal. I guess part of your story also has a high degree of unconvention in it. I really love that even though you're very much a scientist and you eventually went to university, you didn't initially start out at university for a whole bunch of reasons that was, I guess, reflective of the time in which you grew up. And over the last couple of decades, we've seen such a push to get more young girls still into the sciences, whether that's science, technology, engineering, maths, medicine, etc. I guess what is your advice to someone that's really helped paved that pathway for more people to enter into science? What would your advice be to either young girls thinking about pursuing their interests and passions within STEM, or maybe even the slightly older people that find themselves in the sciences but still in traditionally fields dominated by men?
Probably the right answer to give there is, first of all, you've got to really want to do it. It's got to be a passion. It's not something you can say, well, why don't you be a scientist? So the reason I didn't go to university when I left school was we couldn't afford it. No scholarships back then. And so we just had enough money for a secretarial course. That's how I began. And when I met Louis Leakey, lo and behold, 2 days before his secretary had left, he needed a secretary, and there I was. And that got me right into the world that I wanted to be in, because he was curator of the Natural History Museum. At the time, I didn't want to be a scientist. I wanted to be a naturalist. One of the reasons was that partly that girls went into science in those days. Girls weren't going out into the forest to study wild animals because boys weren't either. And it was just something I wanted to do. And so I think one of the reasons that science hasn't been appealing to girls is that it has the reputation of being cold and hard. And when I first got to Cambridge to do a PhD, even though I hadn't got an undergraduate degree, that's what Leakey did. And I was told I shouldn't have given the chimps names. It wasn't scientific. They should have been numbered. I couldn't talk about their personality, their minds, or their emotions, because those were unique to us. Moreover, nor should I have empathy with them. I had to be only objective. Well, I'd learned from a teacher when I was a child that that was all wrong. That teacher was my dog, Rusty. You can't share your life in a meaningful way with any animal and not know that we're not the only beings on this planet with personality, mind, and emotion. And especially when it comes to empathy. Chimpanzees, okay, they are so like us, but sometimes they behaved in a puzzling way. And if you have empathy with them, you may think, oh, I think I know why he or she did that. And then, having had that aha moment because of empathy, you can put on a scientific hat. And I did learn to love how to express myself in a scientific way and step back and say, now, let me prove whether my idea is right or not.
You've just done the things that meant a lot to you, that you thought would allow for you to make a difference. And along the way, as a result of that, you've really become the icon that you are today. And I don't think most people, although maybe some of the TikTok generation might disagree with me here, aspire to just become icons. But I guess one really significant chapter of your life and career has been as a public figure, trying to create influence, being a role model, and all of the important things that you've done there. And for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about the role of, I guess, representation, and whether that's about having more women, more people of like various diverse backgrounds really being represented on big stages. I guess, what advice would you have to offer for people that are hoping to not just build their brand, but build the sound of their voice? Like, how and what advice would you have to people that have something to say, that they want to share it with the world?
Well, my advice, I never wanted to be an icon. And when I first began to attract attention because of the National Geographic articles and Hugo van Lauwik's film, and so, it was like, here are these black, potentially dangerous creatures in the potentially dangerous jungle, and this young woman, going out among them. And it was kind of Beauty and the Beast sort of thing. And that started it. And then when I began to attract attention so that somebody would come up and say, "Are you Jane Goodall?" And I hated it. And I hated journalists. I used to hide. I used to put dark glasses on, let my hair down. Still, people recognized me. According to my grandmother, they recognized my nose. She always used to say, "I can see your little nose going around in a bus, and I know it's you." But anyway, for whatever. And then at a certain point, I realized I must make use of this. If I care enough about the chimpanzees to want to protect them and their forest home, then I must use this almost notoriety, whatever. And so I began always carrying around little pamphlets. And if somebody came up and wanted an autograph, I would give them the autograph, but I would also give them a pamphlet. I would tell them about our youth program, Roots and Shoots. And I'd say, well, would you like to help? Because we have an awful lot to do. And you could trace when I was doing a lecture tour around America, you could trace where I'd been by the numbers of people who joined the Institute or formed a Roots and Shoots group. It's quite funny. So, the advice is, don't aim to be an icon, just passionately do what you do.
I'd love to hear a bit more about, I guess, how you're feeling about working to address the climate crisis at the moment, working with young people who so inherently get that this is their future. They're trying to protect both for themselves and, again, for even future generations. How do you balance that hope and, dare I say, anger or frustration at times?
Well, I think, one of the problems with the media around the world is that it seems the doom and the gloom is more media worthy, more newsworthy than the stories of hope. And so I'm always encouraging the media to spend much more time on talking about all the incredible projects, the way that areas that we've utterly destroyed can once again be taken over by nature. They may not be quite the same, but life will come back. Animals on the brink of extinction can be given another chance and have been. And this is happening all over the world. And there are all these incredible people tackling what seems impossible and not giving up. And it's these stories of hope, of turning things around. And also, a lot of emphasis needs to be put on the fact that we actually scientifically have so many solutions to so much of what's going wrong. And the problem here that we face is the big corporations who haven't changed their mindset and who feel that everything must be to do with the bottom line, who act as though they believed, I can't believe they believe it, but they act as though they believe the natural resources of the planet are infinite, but they're not, they're finite. And already in some places, they're being used up faster than nature can replenish them. So if we carry on with business as usual, then it will be hopeless. We have to change. And the good news here, and again, we need more space given to it, is the number of businesses and even big corporations like Unilever are changing. And I was talking to a CEO the other day in Singapore of an international company. And he said, Jane, for the last 10 years, I've been working to make my company more environmentally and socially responsible in the home office, along the supply chain, the way we treat our people, where the products are sourced. He said there were three reasons. One, seeing the writing on the wall, realizing that we can't go on using up all these finite natural resources the way we are, with a growing population. Two, consumer pressure. People are beginning to demand the kind of ethically sourced products. And that's where it's so important to alleviate poverty, because if you're really poor, you buy the cheapest just because you have to. You can't afford to say, did it harm the environment, or was it cruel to animals, or is it cheap because of slave labor or unfair wages? But he said, what really got to me, what forced me to change, was my little girl of 8. And she came back from school one day and she said, Daddy, they tell me that what you're doing is hurting the planet. That's not true, is it, Daddy? Because it's my planet. So that again illustrates the power of storytelling. We've got to reach the heart. It's much more important than reaching the head. And you see young people arguing, getting angry, and the person they're arguing with may seem to give in, but inside themselves they say, I'm not going to listen to this. Why should I? But if you can find a story that gets in here to the heart, then you've got a chance to create change.
It's not an easy task, but I think if each one of us figure out exactly what is the contribution we can make, it makes it all a little bit easier. We don't have to all carry the burden of the planet on our shoulders. And even though we might not be able to get back to what things were like in the past, it doesn't mean that the future that we are building together, and I think, again, that's something that people forget, can be a little bit different than what the science currently predicts if we just go along with a business as usual mantra. So, Jane, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of all of the people listening today for sharing your insights, but also for all of the work that you have done and amazingly still continue to do. A huge thank you, Jane.
Thank you too, and good luck in what you're doing, which is making a difference.